This video will focus on the role discretionary stabilisers has to play in the budget outcome. Now, discretionary stabilisers are deliberate changes made by the federal government to the tax rate, tax mix, direction of expenditure or outlays specifically designed to manage aggregate demand. Now, the treasurer uses discretionary stabilizers to manage aggregate demand when automatic stabilizers are inefficient too. So this only occurs when automatic stabilizers in taxation and welfare are not sufficient enough. So where automatic stabilizers, so taxation and welfare payments, are insufficient to change or manage aggregate demand, the treasurer or the federal government uses discretionary stabilizers to manage aggregate demand. And these are also called structural stabilizers. Alright, so let's look at an example of why they use discretionary stabilizers, of an example of a discretionary stabilizer. So we're going to look at the business cycle yet again. The business cycle being a very cyclical nature. And we're going to put a trend line through it again. That's the trend line. We're going to see that the y-axis is GDP and the x-axis is time. So let's say the economy, as it were, a few years ago was in a deep trough, even approaching recession. And this was the case when the GFC hit the economy. So what happened then was that taxation, as part of automatic stabilizers, taxation decreased. And at the same time, welfare payments increased. So theoretically, this pushed aggregate demand again back up towards this steady state of growth around here, or this trend growth. However, taxation, or the decrease in taxation, which automatically happened due to a decrease in income, and the increase in welfare, which automatically occurred when unemployment increased, was actually insufficient to actually move this economy out of recession here. So the government entered a series of budget deficits. And because welfare payments were very high and because taxation was low, government expenses exceeded government revenue. But this was still insufficient to actually move this economy out of this trough or this economic downturn. So what the federal government did was introduced mini discretionary stabilizers here. And we're just going to look at one example, or the most prevalent example of this discretionary stabilizer implemented by the federal government in order to stimulate growth. And this is most applicable to us as well. It was the discretionary stabilizer of the increase in the tax-free threshold to $18,200. So this meant that people earning less than $18,200 did not need to pay any tax. And so what this meant was that it stimulated aggregate demand by increasing or encouraging consumption. We already knew that because people were moving back tax brackets due to the progressive nature of our tax system, their disposable income had increased simply because they had a lower income relative to the tax rate. What that meant was that because the government introduced this new discretionary stabiliser of a decrease in the tax rate, or an increase in the tax-free threshold, this meant an even greater increase in disposable income for those who are earning less than $18,000. And so what this meant is that because disposable income increased, this actually led to increase in consumption spending. And again, similarly, the government introduced mini stimulus packages, so they paid out $900 to most households in order to encourage them to spend and to stimulate the economic growth of the economy, or economic activity of the economy. And so this pushed the economy out of this trough and back into an economic upswing. So that's the role of discretionary stabilisers. They are deliberate changes made by the federal government to the tax rate, tax mix, and the direction of expenditure or government outlays, specifically designed to manage aggregate demand when automatic stabilisers are insufficient enough to manage aggregate demand by themselves. And an example of a discretionary stabiliser implemented by the federal government in recent years in order to stimulate economic activity was this increase in tax-free threshold to $18,200. So that's discretionary stabilisers, and they are deliberate. We must note that they are deliberate changes, and I cannot stress this enough. They are deliberate changes made by the federal government.